I think it's really important for people to own their future. So we're facing two existential crises of our time, one being climate change and one being global pollution. And they're equally important and really critical that we deal with. Our entire Earth is our life support system. It's powered by solar energy, whether that is incident in the sunlight or stored in the form of fossil fuels. And the Earth provides us everything we need to thrive: clean water, fresh air, fertile ground, and the biodiversity of species of which we are one part. And I am not going to talk right now about the United Nations report that came out last week assessing the global biodiversity because it's just too scary. But they did conclude that we have time if we take seriously our intentional preservation of our own life support system. And that system is under stress because of fossil fuel combustion, because of resource extraction as the base of our economy, because of expanding populations and the hyperconsumption of especially industrialized nations, populations like ours. That we have only one Earth, and if everyone on this planet lived in the manner that Americans do, we are only 6% of the population, we use 35% of the world's resources. It would take 5.5 planets to meet this level of waste all around the world. And we need to think about, how many of you have children? How many of you have grandchildren? I want you to visualize those children and those grandchildren and think about what they need for their future. And this is the definition of sustainability that was adopted in 1985 by the Brundtland Condition, that we meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that has to be intentional. We can't leave that by accident. We have to plan ahead and take responsibility for what we're doing today that is going to affect the viability of our children and our grandchildren. And climate is inducing migration. You know, we had all those tropical storms down on the coasts, okay? That's where the hub of the petrochemical industry is and has been for decades. Well, those refineries have been damaged 5 times in the last 8 years. Now, if you're a businessman and you're seeing something that comes at you with increasing regularity and you have a 100-year flood 3 times in the last 5 years, you're going to start looking around, right, for what you do instead. And what they do instead is they find where we are, Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, right in the middle of the Marcellus Shale, and they're trying to convince us that this is the way of the future, and they're migrating up here because we are going to have water and we are going to have viable living conditions. Now, you just heard a wonderful presentation about the importance of growing food. Conditions that are ripe and ready for food production are going to become scarcer as the drought advances across the Midwest. And places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, even Virginia, are going to be more and more critical for food production. So think about what happens to the water, to the land, to the food potential when you have fracking as the predominant mode of energy production. It is not something you want to trivialize with. We have an opportunity to choose for the next 10,000 years whether we're going to go forward with another round of fossil-dependent industry-driven development or whether we're going to choose a different path. And the problem that we have is that this entire industry was exempt from 7 federal laws. It was exempt, and that means they don't need to do things that the cement industry does, that the manufacturers of anything have to do, that even coal companies have to do. They are exempt even from things that protect workers and public health safety. So this whole industry, in my opinion, is illegal. This law was written in the back room of a back room under a vice president who was protecting and endorsing his own industry. And I think, yes. I think that we need to recognize that fact and be holding the right people accountable. You have to change this law. Senator Casey of Pennsylvania has introduced the closing of the Halliburton loophole every year since 2007, and it hasn't even come out of committee. So it's not that the remedy isn't known and available, it's that it's being suppressed. There are 39 states that have shale gas deposits. 15 million people live within a mile of fracking operations, and you've heard the health effects that pertain to people within a mile of fracking operations. We have 15 million people in this country with a vested interest in seeing to it that this industry does not become the dominant form of our energy production. There are 172,100 oil and gas industry employees. Only 6.5% of those are represented by unions. So they don't even have an organized voice to help keep their interests and their protections at heart. And really, you heard about the economic fate of the gas that's coming from the shale. They're betting that they're going to make plastic to turn that economic picture around. Now, what do you think we need more of in this world, right? Really? Is this what you want to have to give up your land, your water, and your health and safety for? More single-use plastic? I don't think so. That's my opinion, right? Today, we use plastic, which is a material designed to last forever, to make products that have a useful life of minutes. This is not a technology problem, people. This is an ethics problem. This is a moral challenge of how we are going to leave the earth for our successors, for our children, and for our grandchildren. We need to replace the fear of not knowing how to get to a better place with something better. This is a picture I took at the Clean Power Plan hearings in Pittsburgh in 2015, when all the coal miners, 3,500 of them, came into the streets saying that you're going to destroy us, we're going to end up, bankrupt. It's really, really scary if you're in one of these industries, because what you see out the other end of that lens does not look like something you want. However, reality sets in. You have to have a plan for a sustainable economy. There are better options, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But a just transition to a workforce that creates decent work and quality jobs is not going to happen by accident. It's not going to happen left to itself. It needs proactive agitators and advocates. Corporations are not people, okay? When you define corporations as persons under the law, corporations do not have children. They don't breathe. They don't bleed. They don't drink water. All they look at is the profits of the next quarter. And if they're multinational corporations, they don't have accountability in the political system of any of the countries in which they operate. So they kind of flow above the thing and kind of manipulate all over the world. A plan for a just transition has to recognize that we need to take care of the workers from the legacy industries. You cannot let happen what happened in Pittsburgh when the steel mills closed. Everyone was left to sort of fend for themselves. Oh, you lost your job. Too bad, so sad. That is not a humane, moral, ethical way forward. You have to look at the transition requirements. What happens to the pensions and the health benefits? The need for education and meaningful redirection of skills, and reinvesting in communities so that you have a way forward, right? There are pathways forward, and you heard a little bit about regenerative agriculture. I'm going to spend some time on renewable energy, but there's also the whole area of green chemistry to make materials and goods that don't depend on fossil input and that don't make toxic and noxious byproducts. So we need to look at system solutions to these system problems. And we're not talking about a simple transition. You're really talking about a transformation, a metamorphosis of the economy into a different way of doing business. And we have 150 years of tradition, so to speak, that we need to rethink and remeld, retrieve what is salvageable and important as a resource and transform it into something that can be sustained. All this paper on your tables, that is what you're going to be doing. What do we have to work with? What can we take forward? What do we need to leave behind? How can we transform our economy and our visions and our needs into something that can be sustained? And sustainability as a goal means that you have a balance between the economy and the society and the environment, recognizing that when you have all three of those pieces in balance, you have a viable community and a living planet. Right now, those are not the conditions that we experience. Right now, the economy is driving everything. The dollar is almighty. The environment, we've had 87 environmental protections rescinded in just the last 2 years. And social infrastructure, the laws that protect people, the structures and infrastructure that help people support each other, the safety net, well, that's socialism. We don't want any of that, right? Taking care of each other is really important, and it's an important part of what makes a society into a community of caring people who go forward together. That's really important. So we need to look at how we can make those three circles to come into better alignment for a sustainable solution to these problems. And one of the things we have to do, a couple of people have mentioned metrics today. What do we measure? Because what gets measured gets done. Everything goes according to the gross domestic product. When the gross domestic product goes up, everybody's happy. Consumer confidence is great, people buy stuff and everybody's happy, right? Well, not really. Because remember that life support system I was talking about? That one that says fresh water, clean air, fertile ground, and biodiversity. Those are the things that you absolutely can't live without. They're priceless. But when you're counting the gross domestic product, they count as zero in that equation. That is one of our biggest problems, is that those things that are priceless to our community, priceless to our survival, priceless to our future, are not valued in the computation of the gross domestic product. And we can fix that. We have to reframe this problem. And I'll give you a quote from Amory Lovins, who wrote a lot of materials back into the 70s about what you need to do to be sustainable. He said, we have a temporary aberration called industrial capitalism. And it eliminates its two most important features, the natural world and properly functioning societies. There is no way this kind of capitalism is viable to prevent the living earth from slipping away. This is important. We depend on the living systems of the living earth for air, water, for fresh water, for pollination, for food production, for fiber production. All these things that are essential to us are just exploited and destroyed by an extractive-based economy that just looks at taking things out of the ground and turning them to trash as rapidly as possible. There are a whole list of tax loopholes that you can take advantage of if you're in the oil and gas and coal development industry. And these are things that are written hardcore into the law. They don't have to be passed every budget cycle. They don't have to be lobbied for on a daily basis like you do if you're trying to expand the renewable energy portfolio standard or talk about getting community net metering, any kind of initiatives that would help the renewable industry has to be battled day and night. These are all there, and they would have to be either rescinded or modified. And the subsidies actually matter because without them, 98% of all operating coal plants would be unprofitable. Without the subsidies, 50% of the yet-to-be-drilled oil wells are not profitable at $50 a barrel oil. So the tax preferences that these industries receive actually makes the difference between whether they go forward as projects or not. So your taxpayers, would you choose to keep things that are not viable and not profitable above water just because they've been there for 100 years? Or do we have to make a different decision? The status quo has been bought and paid for. The oil and gas and coal companies lobby extensively $354 million in the 2015-16 election cycle for all offices. And they received $29.4 billion in total subsidies as a result of that investment. So you see there's a cause and effect here. That's an 8,200% return. Of course they're going to continue doing that until they're stopped. And right now they have an oil and gas lobbyist running the Department of Interior, which is responsible for leasing federal lands. So if we just coast along in this status quo and tinker around the edges, we will not make the goals of reducing our carbon burden that are in the Paris Accord. We are trying to reach 26 to 28% below the 2005 level, and our current policies will get us to about 11 to 13%. But this is with almost no federal initiative that pushes in the direction of moving away from fossil industries. And there is a huge cost for not taking action on climate change. This is the report that's required, the fourth climate assessment. It was required by a congressional act in 1990, and it was issued the Friday after Thanksgiving by 17 current federal agencies. So this is a current report. And the cost of not acting includes heat-induced productivity losses, $160 billion of lost wages a year. It includes higher energy costs because when power plants are brought down by extraordinary storms, also derating of power plants when the waters are too warm to cool them effectively. This has happened in Alabama and Mississippi and Texas, even in Pittsburgh. To some extent, the rivers get too warm to cool the power plants and they're derated. Huge amounts of inefficiencies introduced. Infrastructure damage, not just real estate value because of coastal areas, but also inland flooding that destroys bridges and roads, infrastructure of all kinds. Everyone is running around rebuilding. If you're in the Midwest right now, they've had unprecedented spring flooding. They've missed the whole spring planting cycle. So grains are going to be expensive this year at the end of the year because they've missed a whole planting cycle. These are costs, real costs, from failing to act. And if you don't take care of them, we also have shrinking environmental capital. People were talking earlier today about ecotourism and about fishing and freshwater fishing as a value of the community on the rivers and streams, our area. These are things that are suffering $230 million a year losses for shellfish alone, $140 billion a year in recreational industry losses. So we need to be aware that not acting is also expensive. We have ways forward if we look at renewable energy systems that conserve and restore resources instead of destroying them, regenerative agriculture that makes non-toxic food systems and captures carbon into the ground so that you help to reverse the carbon cycle by sequestering it in plant material, and green chemistry and the circular economy. When you apply these principles, you can really make changes. This is a picture of the Forest Hills Borough Building. Now, we're a small community, 5,200 people. We needed a new town hall because the 1920s old fire station was totally inadequate and not ADA accessible, and one of our police officers almost broke his leg when he had tripped on the steps. We built a passive solar design, geothermal heated building and put solar on the roof. And it is a net zero energy building that serves the library, the administrative offices, and the police station. We did not raise taxes, and we got an $880 check for the first 12 months of operation because we made more electricity than we used. If we can do that in a little town, mostly residential community, you can do this. This is not rocket science. It's just being practical and looking forward. And we have better choices. The green jobs economy is very diverse. It is very broad. It's defined as jobs in businesses that produce goods and services that benefit the environment and conserve natural resources. This is not esoteric, rocket science, weird, creepy, futuristic stuff. This is really practical stuff. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the energy sector because I don't have a lot of time, but there are more workers in solar than in fossil fuel industries altogether right now in the energy industry. You can see that there are 373,807 solar workers and only 187,000 in natural gas, oil, and coal. And wind is another 101,000, and nuclear is under 100,000. The thing that's really interesting is that solar and wind are growing rapidly, and oil, gas, and coal are all either steady or falling a lot or falling a little bit. And they're going to continue to be more competitive in price because the technology costs are coming down. Demand is increasing for efficiency and clean energy solutions. Everybody's looking at how to save money. Throwing money out the chimney is not a productive thing to do. If you can make it more efficient, then that's dollars in your pocket, right? And more supportive policies are emerging, especially at the state level. Many states have taken an initiative to adopt policies that encourage the green energy industries. And because of that, they are actually growing in many places. And investment, private investment, is increasing in the renewable energy sector because people know it makes sense and because the profits are proven and demonstrable, as opposed to those in the fracking industry where you have lots of notes at the end of the financial statements explaining why it isn't really as good as you think it is, but it really is. The smoke and mirrors does not apply here. And I wanted to give you some specifics, but I'm not going to go through these in a tremendous amount of detail. Obviously, it's solar energy and wind, and these have both been growing by 25.5% and 16% over the last year. Now, in the last 2 years, we've had a decline in these industries because of the tariffs on China. Much of the raw material and solar cell manufacturing is done overseas. And the objective was, of course, to have it made here. The net result is the price went up and it stayed overseas. So the demand went down. And this was predicted, and this is what happens when you interfere with the global market. And the energy storage and advanced electric grid field is growing enormously, especially community-scaled grids. In response to storm damage, a lot of places are looking at becoming more resilient by bringing some of their energy supply into their own community and connecting them to each other. So you have more and more communities saying, good heavens, when the power goes out, we're at the end of the line. It takes them weeks to come to our community because there's a lot of more priority things ahead. So we're going to put some backup in our own community, and that has a tremendous amount of value in terms of adding resilience and also just safety and comfort to communities. So more and more people are looking in this direction. And the technology for doing this, as I said, is coming down in price every year. Energy efficiency is a huge field. It's very broad. It includes not just the diagnostics of what would make a place more efficient, but also retrofitting and adapting and installing energy efficient equipment. It's 2.2 million workers, and they're mostly in the construction trades, and they're good jobs. And the whole arena of advanced vehicles and transportation is just exploding. And it's attracting more and more investment. And I'm not just talking about Tesla, I'm talking about mainstream companies like Ford. They're going to be doing 40 electric vehicle and hybrid vehicles on the market by 2022. And that is going to be a whole new area where they use less energy to make, and they use a lot less energy to run, and they have fewer breakable parts, so they have a longer lifespan. And the technology for doing this is emerging, again, very rapidly. And you get a lot of diverse jobs in skill levels in these energy industries, a whole array from the lighter blue are just high school, and the middle blue is like trade school or some college, and the darker blue is where you need a college education or a degree. So you have a whole array of options available in this field. They're not all just low-skilled, low-wage jobs. And it is, in fact, true that in these three clean energy sectors, the average wage is above the national average of $23.86 an hour. The clean energy production field is at 28. and energy efficiency is 2590, and environmental management at 2745. And those are just the averages. You also get higher end wages in highly specialized fields as well. So I'm not going to go through all the different kind of jobs that are in each of these sectors in the interest of time, but you can see these are not unfamiliar job fields. These are the kinds of jobs that you would have in your community. These are not the kind of jobs that are served from somebody from out of state who comes in with a crane and stays 6 weeks and leaves. These are people who are going to be here running systems, running operations, and being part of the community for long periods of time. Environmental management is a particularly growing arena as people add management of microgrids and management of community energy systems. That is the field that they're going to be ending up in. So I really think what we need is a call to action. People complain that we don't get enough money for these jobs, that we're not getting the recognition and investment that we need. You don't get what people give you, you get what you negotiate, and you get what you demand. And the way you do that is you organize. You organize. And you've been hearing about that all day. That is the only thing that gets the will of all the people to countermand the vested interests of a few multinational corporations. Enough. Enough. We've got to stand up and say we have better choices. We have things that we would prefer. And we need to see to it that those who are making the decisions know that. And we need to listen to our children. I mean, you have 6th graders, 5th graders, high school students bringing lawsuits on the government, demanding the right to have a livable future. We have no right to deny them a living earth. We have no right to say that the profits of this quarter matter more than my granddaughter's breathing ability 20 years down the road. So we have to think about the obligations of citizens. No, democracy is not a passive sport. It's not a spectator sport. You have to get involved. You have to get into the trenches. How many of you have run for office when you oppose the people that you don't agree with? How many of you are represented by somebody you don't agree with? Challenge them. Challenge them. I did it. I know. You can do this. Summer League, unseated, a 9-term incumbent representative in a primary because she went out in the streets and she talked to people. She got her high school cousins to go canvass and lobby, and she said, it isn't okay for the people of Braddock to have dirty air on a regular basis when the people who work in that plant don't even live here. You need to stand up and say what you want. And if the industries have been holding you down and telling you you have no choice because that's just the way it is if you want a job, not true, not true. And if you think that they're not paying enough for the kinds of jobs that we want, the laws can be changed. Think about that, $20.5 billion that are written into the tax code to benefit the fossil industry since 1837. I think they've been subsidized enough to get started, right? They keep saying subsidies are supposed to help you get over the hump, right? Well, once you're over the hump, you should be on your own, right? How long are we going to wait for them to stand on their own 2 feet? They're not going to stand on their own 2 feet because they're bringing us all down. Did I just unplug this again? I apologize. Anyway, I'm almost done. If we're going to have a just transition, you cannot leave this to the invisible hand of the market. The market doesn't give you the signals for people to make better choices. We have to make those choices ourselves and shift that hand of the market and shift those decision makings into a direction that supports living people on a living planet. The laws of nature are not negotiable. They are going to happen, whether we agree with it or not, whether we admit that they exist or not. Global climate change and global pollution will inundate us unless we change our laws to enable and promote a green economy. And American policy is looking backwards to a world that no longer exists. This is the world of the words of the United Nations Environment Program Executive Director Akim Steiner when he was lamenting our departure from the Paris Agreement. We need to recognize that the rest of the world is moving, and we either shift ourselves and become leaders, as we should be, or we are going to be inundated by laws of nature that are not negotiable. Physics, chemistry, biology, they don't change for us. So what do we want? Government-driven investments in a green economy. Let's shift those subsidies away from the fossil industry into a whole range. Green energy, renewable, regenerative agriculture, green chemistry, all of these new arenas where you have sustainable industries that can drive our future. Invest in innovation and skills development. Invest in the people first, people first. What do we need to have in the way of skills? What do we need to do to inspire people to go into these emerging fields? And the social safety net, especially pensions and benefits. We bailed out Goldman Sachs, we bailed out General Motors, we bailed out one big corporate interest after another. We can bail out the people who've been working in these industries that we need to migrate away from. You do not walk away from them and leave them to become foreclosed upon and bankrupt. That isn't what we do to each other, right? We're a community of caring people. We're citizens. These are our neighbors, our friends, our associates, our families. You do not leave people to fend for themselves in adversity. We take care of each other because that's what we do. We have to consult with our social partners, the unions, the employers. We need to be at the table crafting solutions, just as you're about to do this afternoon. Your ideas matter. What you want to do with your community is the most important thing that should happen in your community. Okay, we had 6 community design charrettes in Forest Hills to come up with that building. I mean, we talked to the firemen and the seniors, and we had a lot of community table drawing going on, and they weren't all totally sold on the idea when we started out. After we got the $880 check, they changed their mind. No opposition appears. So we have to look at a healthy environment for healthy people and a healthy planet. If we don't sustain our life support system, none of us are going to be healthy in the long run. You have to have fresh water, clean air, fertile ground, or people and everything else alive on this earth will not thrive. If you save the environment, we will have good jobs and we will have healthy people. These are essential things that can make change happen. Decide that you're going to have a living earth for your children. I wish you the best in your deliberations. Thank you so much.